This is episode 610 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Well, Wally, I hope you had a relaxing and thoughtful Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, very nice. And, definitely remember the veterans in my family as well as many others who did a lot for our country over the years. That's for sure.
And especially those who fell in the defense of our great nation. So, formerly Decoration Day. That was one of the things I did in homeschool. I made sure my kids knew the genesis of all the holidays because, don't want to confuse Memorial Day and Veterans Day. It's also helpful to understand. And we never really did get to the bottom of it on Easter when it comes to how they switch it around based on the solstices and whatnot. But anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about. We are here to talk about, first and foremost, a report from our friends at the Center to Unleash, or the Committee to Unleash Prosperity. They have been putting out on occasion reports relating to job creation by state since February of 2020, which of course means kind of the beginning of COVID and the subsequent months and years since then, all the way up to the present. And it's a very useful report. You look at whether this is a red state we're dealing with, a blue state, as New Mexico is, Democrat governor, both houses under Democrat control, vice versa for a red state. And then, it's a pink state or it's a light blue state. And, there's a little bit of good news and a little bit of bad news here. And it's not surprising that New Mexico is not at the bottom of this list for once, because we have been undergoing one of the greatest oil booms in the history of any state in the country. And that has just, regardless of the policy of what's actually happened, that has given huge, unprecedented resources to New Mexico government, and it has also given jobs and economic activity to mostly the Permian Basin, the southeast New Mexico county. So it's not a surprise that we're not at the bottom. We are 25th in the nation, which obviously is dead in the middle. We are, however, at the bottom in our region. Utah is second best in terms of job creation. Texas third, Arizona sixth, Colorado, another blue state, 12th. Oklahoma 16th, and New Mexico 25th. So from that perspective, thinking about geographical and weather advantage and the fact that Americans have been moving south and west for the better part of the last 100 years, it's kind of disappointing in that regard. But relative to other blue states, and blue states do populate the very bottom of this list. So the best state is actually Idaho. I mentioned Utah, then there's Florida, Texas. So you get the picture there. At the very bottom, Washington, D.C., Hawaii, Louisiana, a red state, Maryland, deep blue, Vermont, Massachusetts, blue. Then there's West Virginia, but New York, Illinois. So it is definitely a chart that shows that politics do matter tremendously when it comes to job creation. And Wally, your thoughts?
Well, we've talked a lot, Paul, and the key is that we have a lot of money in our state, as you mentioned, from oil and gas, but the policies and the governance and the use of that money has certainly not been done in such a fashion that it's encouraged economic growth outside of the oil and gas industry. And, will it ever? I'm not sure, but, I think we are losing really, I don't know, once in a lifetime. It's like, okay, oil and gas is going to be around for quite a bit longer. But, at some point, we're either going to basically be eating the seed corn, if we will, putting together stupid policies that really don't help the overall economy and don't help the overall people of New Mexico, but for a variety of reasons are very popular with certain issue groups, or so we're either going to support them or we're going to support the overall economy. And guess what? There will come a time, I think it's a long time in the future, unfortunately, that oil and gas may be a much, much smaller part of our economy. And then the impact of what we do between now and then will really be felt. And it's one of those things in politics, man, it's not always easy to get people in politics to do something that might benefit here a few years or a decade down the road, much less a year down the road. And I think that's where New Mexico stands right now.
So I assume you're saying, unfortunately, oil and gas are too big of a proportion of New Mexico's economy because the politicians have done a poor job of broadening and putting our policies in place that will create broader prosperity across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a good summation.
Yeah, I agree. And just as a quick side note, the Albuquerque Journal has been running a series on abandoned oil and gas wells and talking about the impact associated with those. And I'm not really going to get into all the details. I am a firm believer that companies that make messes should be required to clean those up, and government should uh, require them to clean those up. But on the flip side is if there is a company that left before and abandoned their wells before we had these environmental regulations in place, unfortunately, we at some point the taxpayers need to clean this up and do a job of being economic environmental stewards. The state of New Mexico has plenty of resources to do this and do all the kinds of things that we talk about with regard to lowering taxes, diversifying our economy. We truly have unprecedented amounts of resources, and it just is hard to see how those resources are being used. And one of the big, I think, if you have a current policy goal for the Rio Grande Foundation, it's simply to highlight and expose the opportunities that we have right now here in New Mexico to do so much better for our state and to drag us out of poverty and to drag us out of 50th or 52nd or whatever position we're in, but especially using those resources to further New Mexico as a state. And it's something that there's not a whole lot of activity happening in that regard.
Yeah, that is true, Paul. And let me just say about that Albuquerque Journal series, it's like nobody disagrees that these sites shouldn't be cleaned up. And if the company's long gone and can no longer be identified, then it does fall to the taxpayers or the industry. The industry puts money into a fund that was ostensibly designed to deal with situations like this. But guess what? Our friends in Santa Fe, the legislators, took a lot of that money and spent it on other things. And so now there's not nearly the amount of money you would think there would be in something like that. And not to in any way imply a moral equivalency, but that's, oh man, just to look at that oil situation. Where is the series on? Hey, why is crime so bad in New Mexico, and why can't we make any progress? Hey, why are we last in education and can't make any progress? Why is our tax structure with all of this money such that it discourages veterans from retiring here? It discourages retirees. It discourages business. It's like I'm all, let me just say, good job on this series. So, it's like, great, you exposed it, get it done. It will be cleaned up, But let's look at the other things that really are going to have an impact for a long, long time to come unless they're addressed. And also to the point where, you know, we get into a bad recession, things happen, there's certain policies in place. I won't call it collapse, but dramatic reduction in quality of life in New Mexico is still very much in the cards, and we risk that every day by not, addressing the things that we think are important. I know the Rio Grande Foundation does. I think are important, and those don't get talked about nearly enough.
Yeah, I agree. And that was also among my thoughts that, gee, it would be nice if, and obviously, uh, these abandoned oil and gas wells are a real issue. They are something that needs to be addressed. But it is only one step. And I haven't seen anything saying in these articles, hey, we have so much money flowing in from this oil and gas resource that the state of New Mexico could easily designate some amount of money. Where should the money come from to clean up this problem? Oh, we have that money. Acknowledging that, and then obviously my goal or my dream would be to have a more thorough conversation about how can a state that is so wealthy in its own resources remain as one of the poorest states in the country. How do we continue to have such a poor population when the state of New Mexico is doing so well? Uh, and that's one of the issues that we face with the media. It's not just the bias in terms of how they cover a story, but the real bias is in the stories they actually cover. And I'm not going to say it's 100% bias. I just think that it's I probably an ignorance thing. I think they do not see the pieces of the puzzle, and if you're unable to see the pieces, you're not going to put them together.
Yeah, and Paul, a lot of bad public policy, its impacts don't hit our state and our economy and our world like tornadoes or hurricanes. It
Exactly.
hits it like water damage, and not from floods, the kind where there's a pipe that breaks that you don't find out about for 3, 6, 9 months, and then it's damage your foundation and really damage your structure. And that is really a lot of what has happened in New Mexico. What do they say that high blood pressure is the silent killer? Well, a lot of New Mexico's policies and they're being implemented in some key areas are just slowly but surely, ticking down towards the state getting into the point where, man, we can't let Puerto Rico into the union and as a state because we might lose a representative, but man, we might be 51st if we're not careful. And so the time is now to do that. And guess what? We have money. Can we get it put onto the roads to make the roads better? Doesn't seem so. Can we hire cops? It doesn't seem so. Can we hire more prosecutors? Maybe there's a little bright spot in Bernalillo County with that, but can we get best teachers and the best process and approaches for improving education? Doesn't seem so. And so money is not helping us right now in any meaningful way on the things that really are investment, sustainable, and overall help. Paul, as I've said this before. Uh, one of my mentors in the accounting field used to talk about trust fund babies or children who would later in life inherit huge amounts of money from an uncle or from a family member. And he told me it's like money does not change the direction of your life; it just accelerates it. And that is a cautionary tale for New Mexico because is it possible to be worse off because of the money we have in the long term if we spend it inappropriately and don't use policies that really help the large portion of the population? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Great conversation there. A recent article based on testimony came out with Francis Collins, if you'll recall. He was one of the maybe not Fauci level folks under the COVID regime, but he was the head of the NIH, and he recently admitted that there was no science to justify social distancing policies. Now, there is a addendum to this story that's intriguing as well, but NIH Director Francis Collins was asked, "Do you recall science or evidence that supported the 6-foot distance?" "I do not." And then he was asked, "Have you seen any evidence since then supporting the 6-foot rule?" And he again reiterated, "I have not," which I think this is one of the ones that was most obvious in terms of the COVID policies that, you drew they had the lines and the arrows on the floor and of the Walmart or the various other shopping centers. And I think a lot of people, including my own children, thought this was nutty. And that was at the time, unaided to science, as they say. More interestingly, I was just doing some background on this issue and found a Facebook post from our dear Senator Martin Heinrich. About 4 years ago is the date. It was, I believe, sometime in April of 2020. And here is Heinrich. "While 6-foot social distancing is still the best way to slow the spread of COVID-19, the CDC now also recommends using face coverings when going into public settings like grocery stores and pharmacies." He highlights and embeds a video from the CDC on how to make a homemade cloth face mask. Since deleted by the CDC, but there for all the world to see. Now it's at errorsofenchantment.com, but a few keystroke clicks will take you right to Senator Heinrich and his granted, right at the early days of COVID, talking about these since debunked policies, not just the 6-foot distancing thing, but the cloth mask thing really was something I just was baffled by at the time. And that, we talked about, and you could go back and find podcast after podcast of us talking about, well, maybe N95s can work in certain circumstances for certain people, but these cloth masks are completely ridiculous. And I thought that was a fun little treat there.
No, that is a blast from the past. Remember when? One of the things, and we talked about this, one of the things that has really escaped, and I think this is a failure of the innumeracy that exists amongst many Americans, particularly the media. I think politicians fall into this trap a lot too, is Paul, viruses are very, 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 very small, and they act like they're these big things that can see X's on the floors in grocery stores and differentiate between 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. When they talk about it's like a speck of dust going through a chain link fence. The scales that is involved that viruses operate are much different than people think, and this was one of those. I think maybe truly political is like maybe they had nothing, and they had nothing in the beginning, and then they put all of and when they had nothing, they focused on social distancing and masks. Then they focused on the vaccine, and when the vaccine was shown to be increasingly ineffective, the pandemic worked itself out. But yeah, this was a political. It's like, we're not doing nothing. We're doing social distancing and masks. So I don't know. It's one of those. It's like if you cut your arm off and you're spurting, it's like, here's a Band-Aid. It's like, no, we need more than a Band-Aid on this. But I do think it's like it's from the movie, Do You Want the Truth? You Can't Handle the Truth. We're not sure that anything's working right now. But to admit that truth would say, "Oh my goodness, the government doesn't have all the answers." So
Well, I would also say that you know, not just so-called experts in the field, which you would put
in air
Francis Collins
quotes,
in that theoretical group of people. We know, and especially after our witnessing of the COVID situation, I think it's easy to see how the experts are not necessarily correct on a lot of the issues, and obviously, COVID is replete with examples of so-called experts failing and failing miserably. But when it comes to a guy like Senator Heinrich, now Heinrich's a smart guy. I profoundly disagree with him on a number of policy issues, but he doesn't know any better than you and I, for example, some of these challenges and situations regarding COVID-19. Now, I mean, his post is from early on in the pandemic, but he's just parroting what the so-called experts have to say. And those experts turned out to be wrong. Heinrich turned out to be wrong. And quite frankly, we turned out to be much more correct on many of these issues around COVID than did Senator Heinrich or even, Francis Collins, a so-called expert. So it's just one of those things that you've got to do your own research and put your own thought into the reality of what these politicians are shoving at you, especially if you're dealing with something like a pandemic where there's a great deal of uncertainty in the situation, and it's a new thing that we're dealing with. Obviously, it's not the only time government screws up, but the chances of them screwing up badly are only enhanced when it's kind of a fast-moving, new type situation. But we knew pretty quickly that there was no logic to any of it whatsoever.
yeah. And then Paul, there's a lot of academic research on quote unquote experts, both in economics and other social sciences. And there's a lot of times the the wisdom of the group, tends to do much better than quote unquote the experts. And then, as you say, when you have something that's new and fast moving and the data is scarce, yeah, you can be an expert, but the odds of you necessarily always coming up with a good answer, much less the right answer, the best answer, is not as high as many would like to believe.
Yeah. All right. We're going to move to some issues here in the city of Albuquerque, starting off with uh, a proposal that will be voted on June 3rd, as I see it, that would address the voting threshold for uh, elections at the city of Albuquerque. And, a few years ago, actually, the in the wake of the R.J. Berry mayoral election, uh, city council decided under left liberal control that they wanted to make sure that people who won races, whether it's mayoral or council, that they won a outright majority of the votes cast. So, you had a three-way race for mayor. You had R.J. Berry won, or you had a city council race where there was a three-way race. And unless you achieved that 50% threshold, you had to go to a runoff. And those runoffs, let's just say they ain't cheap. One recent runoff in District 6 for a single council seat, so not citywide here, we're talking about one city council seat, cost $750,000. Now, I'm of the belief that even the city of Albuquerque could probably find a better use for that $750,000 than another election, but that's just us. And I don't I'm not of the belief that there's some magical, component with 50% that makes for a better democracy or a real democracy. This is, after all, a city that has flirted with and is seriously considering still ranked choice voting, which is not just anti-majoritarian, but is highly confusing and delays the outcome of the election in terms of the results being available for days at a time, potentially in places that they've undertaken it, because it's so very confusing. But uh, Dan Lewis and Clarissa Pena, two city councilors, one a conservative Republican, one a, I don't know, you could call her the moderate Democrat, South Valley Democrat. They have put forth a bill or a proposal at city council that would, if adopted, allow the voters to decide to abandon the 50% with the runoff and go to a 40%, which is much more likely to see a winner in a three-way election, and that person who got that 40% would win the race. So I think this is perfectly legitimate and reasonable. As you might imagine, a lot of progressives who are the kind of people who adopted this because R.J. Berry did once upon a time get elected mayor, that they don't like it. Katie Duhigg, state senator, former county clerk, I guess, or city clerk at Albuquerque, called the idea anti-democratic in a opinion piece. I don't understand that logic. And generally speaking, she also claimed that R.J. Berry had a difficult time uniting the city and kind of being mayor when he won with less than 50% of the vote. I find that hard to believe, considering that R.J. Berry then went on to beat Pete Donnelly with more than 68% of the vote in the following election. So he obviously was pretty popular, including among a lot of Democrats. What we remember about R.J. Berry, alas, is two things that destroyed his legacy. One, semi-self-inflicted, which is the DOJ and the police issues that we were experiencing under Berry's administration, and the completely self-inflicted ART bus system. So Berry kind of did leave in disgrace, unfortunately, for him and for the city of Albuquerque. But that was really not related to his vote totals. And I don't know. What's your thoughts, Wally?
Well, it's interesting. Everyone likes to say this is undemocratic, and all undemocratic means is that maybe my guys won't be as easily elected under this system. And the same people that say, "Oh, this 40% is undemocratic," say what we need is ranked choice voting, which is like uh, that's like stepping up to a craps table and never having played craps, the dice game, and say, "Now, how does this work?" So it's just I'm not sure. I think the 40%, would be fine. I don't. Your point about elections being expensive, they didn't used to be as expensive when there were just voting places on voting day, and you could do an absentee ballot if you're going to be out of town. But now, anytime we have elections, we have all these voting centers, we have extended voting times, and so yeah, they cost a lot of money. So, is this something that that 40% could help? Maybe it could. The other thing that is interesting is in New Mexico, anyway. I don't think there's lots and lots and lots of shades of Republicans in terms of policy, and first of all, it doesn't really matter that much in most places because there
Right.
aren't enough to really implement some of their ideas as it is. But on the left, we're seeing more and more groups splinter away, various levels of progressivism. And maybe they're seeing that if there's seven shades of progressive and only one or two shades of conservatism, maybe it'll make it a lot easier for more conservative minded candidates to get elected. Maybe that's what they're really worried about.
Oh, I absolutely think that's correct because yeah, Republicans, at least at the city level, are much more inclined to stick together. But you have the moderate Democrat, the liberal Democrat, and then the hardcore progressive Democrat, and maybe another progressive Democrat, but they've got face tattoos, and that's where you wind up in an election. Oh, actually, we have District 6, the election results. Nicole Rogers would have actually won the election first time around with 40% of the vote. Jeff Hayne, the moderate Democrat, had slightly fewer votes. Kristen Green, another Democrat, had about less than half the votes of Rogers. And then Abel Otero, he of the aforementioned scandal for his claiming a criminal background that he didn't actually have. He had dropped out of the race.
Something that usually only gets rappers into trouble, not
Right.
political candidates.
Now, the
So,
critical thing is that in that general election for city council for that district, you had 7,409 total votes cast. In the runoff, you had 4,629 votes cast. So if your idea of democracy is maximizing the amount of people who engage in the process, then there's no question, because just over 60% of the votes in the runoff, you had just 60% of the votes in the runoff as you did in the general election. So I would say that clear choice for small d democracy would be to solve things in the general election when the most people are informed, engaged, and actually voting. But anyway, this will all be on the agenda for June 3rd at City Council. The proposal is P-24-1. You can go to Errors of Enchantment and find the 40% threshold post, and if you are inclined, weigh in. Wally had a chance to weigh in with KOAT Channel 7 briefly about the city budget that was passed. Not a lot to add to the discussion aside from it's a $1.4 billion budget. It is what I would call a status quo budget, which is not going to lead towards more public safety officers, more money dedicated to public safety in general, which of course is where I believe the money needs to go in the city of Albuquerque, and I think a lot of people feel that way. You will still have zero bus fares, a new free rideshare program, but you know, when you hear politicians talk about public safety and making that a priority, the budget is certainly one manifestation of that. Now, the budget is not the only manifestation of that. I believe that we could have much better policing in the city of Albuquerque if the mayor was serious about addressing public safety. Now, it does look like we're finally, eventually here going to get out from under the DOJ, but that even though we may have achieved their standards for policing, it's still going to take, I've heard, 2 years for us to get out from under the DOJ and this consent decree. But the fact is that even with the officers we have, there is still a lot to be done with regard to public safety. Adding more money to the budget would be another way to, at least for policing, would be another way to highlight that this is a priority for the current mayor and for the political leadership of the city. But they didn't do that, and I think we are going to just kind of bounce along with maybe some deviation to the positive, some deviation to the negative, but we're not going to change anything dramatically regarding public safety here in the city of Albuquerque.
yeah, and it's back to do we have the money? Probably do. Do we have the will? And are we really working on getting more police? We're doing a little something. So, and another, I don't know. I apologize if people think this is unproductive, but just to look at what 1.4 billion means. You know, Albuquerque is somewhere around 561,000 people, and the city budget's right at $2,500 for every man, woman, and child living in the city. So if you're a family of four, there's $10,000 worth of spending on a per capita basis going towards your family. And again, are we getting the results? And is that in the right places? Certainly we want the city water. We want that. We want that good, fast, good, and cheap. We want trash pickup. We want policing, but that seems like it's a little bit far down the line in a lot of other things. Like I believe something we'll talk about here shortly tend to come to the forefront.
Um, yeah, speaking of one of those things, city is going to have another BMX bike track built. This one at a cost of $10 million at Los Altos Park. Back in the mid 2000s, the city spent $4.2 million on a BMX track that's over by the Isotopes Park. This one is somewhat different, and I guess it's called a pump track, meaning that you simply pump the bike back and forth to gain momentum, and that should get you around the track. Uh, you know, again, this isn't necessarily a statement of, oh, this is not a priority, this is something we shouldn't be building, but it does strike me as strange that we're prioritizing another BMX track when the mayor did not fund food for zoo animals in his original budget or $400,000 for IT at the city libraries. And yet here we are with another BMX track. Now, I haven't seen any data on the original BMX track. I know they had some races here recently. I don't know if the public can use the BMX track or when they can use it. Uh, it just strikes me as a way that the city, yet again, using resources in ways that are indeterminate in terms of what their impact will ultimately be. Um, yeah, are we going to try to be a BMX track city? Well, we're certainly investing a fair amount of money in these tracks. It just wonder if they are something that's benefiting the people of Albuquerque and the BMX riding population of the city, and are they able to use these things? I mean, at least if the city spends whatever it spends on a pickleball, not a paddleball, pickleball court, at least you know that the people of Albuquerque are by and large the ones benefiting from that. I just know nothing about the way these BMX tracks are used. I can pretty much assure you that they are not just open to the public throughout the day. There are specific times if you want to use them. But what are those times and what benefits are they providing to average BMX riders around town? It's hard to say.
These are interesting questions. I know a lot about mountain biking, a bit about road cycling. My BMX knowledge is very scant indeed. So, yeah, these are good questions. Do you need the equivalent of tee times, and is there a cost, and what's going on?
Yeah, and kind of as a last local story, but of note statewide, especially because of the industry, is a 50-year-old cigar and pipe shop, Monty's Cigars and Pipe, uh, will be closing its doors here at the end of May. Matthew Monty is a third generation owner of the shop. His grandfather opened in 1976. According to Albuquerque Business First, the closure is the culmination of difficulties placed on the tobacco industry in recent years, such as increased regulation and things that have made it difficult to stay in business. According to Monty, those include regulations, licensing, taxes, crime. He says, I've been doing it by myself for 15 years, and I'm just tired. Uh, I've done business in a lot of other states, and New Mexico is by far the most difficult. So that is a sad situation. The facility is located 3636 San Mateo Boulevard Northeast, and obviously that's a area that has a lot of interesting characters on it. Place that the homeless situation has undoubtedly made doing business in that area a greater challenge. And I guess as a final issue relating to that, uh, the number of tobacco-oriented shops is dwindling to the point where you can pretty much name all of them in the metro area on one hand. Good luck doing that for all the marijuana shops. So we are definitely seeing a massive shift. And maybe you say, well, okay, pot's better for you than tobacco. Fair. I think that's an open question. But the shift is very pronounced. And when the governor is admonishing Mayorkas's office at Homeland Security for stopping certain people from transporting marijuana and taking that on as a very top priority, it certainly seems that the worm has turned here with regard to political support for one industry versus the other.
Yeah, that is absolutely correct. Talk about things that, quote, the experts might not be able to have predicted. Think back 30 years ago, and if you'd say, okay, how many tobacco shops will there be in 2024 and how many marijuana stores, I don't think you would have said, oh, hundreds and hundreds, 600 or more in New Mexico on the marijuana, and across the state, dedicated boutique to tobacco, very, very few, probably, under 25. And boy, we would have to expand the definition of what a tobacco shop would look like I think, to even get to 25.
You got it. Well, I will leave things there. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.